We were told never to speak her name, never to utter a word about her, not even in jest. But when the firelight flickered and the wind grew still, we did. And that was the moment she heard us. That was the moment everything changed. The wind had shifted, no longer carrying the usual whispers of the woods, but something darker, something waiting. We didn't believe the stories at first. How could we? But as the fire crackled and the shadows stretched, we saw something that didn't belong. And just like that, the night we thought would be like any other became a night we'd never escape. It was a night like no other, a thick, oppressive stillness that hung in the air, as if the very world around us had stopped breathing. The forest surrounding the secluded cabin seemed alive in a way that couldn't be explained. We were miles away from civilization, nestled deep in the woods, where the nearest house was a distant memory. The only sounds came from the occasional rustling of leaves in the trees, or the snap of a twig underfoot, a sound that seemed far too loud in the otherwise quiet expanse of nature. The cabin we'd rented for the weekend wasn't much, an old, weathered structure that had seen better days. But it was the perfect place for a group of city friends to escape, to drink, laugh, and forget about the pressures of work. We weren't expecting much, just a few days of campfire stories, stargazing, and maybe a little bit of drunken exploration. Nothing out of the ordinary. There were 4 of us, Adam, Zoe, Jake, and me, Maya. We were all in our mid-20s, and though we all came from different parts of the city, we had one thing in common. We weren't easily spooked. Ghost stories, local legends, they were just that. Stories. Zoe, especially, was the most skeptical of all. She rolled her eyes at any mention of ghosts or spirits. To her, those things were just figments of overactive imaginations, tales passed down to scare the gullible. Seriously, guys, Zoe had laughed earlier that evening as she threw more wood onto the fire. I can't believe you're buying into that nonsense. Ghosts don't live in the woods. They're just stories to scare kids. We had all heard the warnings from the locals, the whispered tales of a woman who haunted these very woods. They spoke of her name with caution, as though the mere mention could bring misfortune. She was said to be a lost soul, forever wandering the forest, searching for those who dared to speak her name, seeking vengeance for some unknown wrong. The details varied, depending on who told the story, but they all had one thing in common. Once you called her, there was no going back. But we laughed it off. We were from the city. We were too smart, too educated to believe in things like that. Let's be real, guys, Jake had said, nudging Zoe. This is just some bedtime story the locals use to keep tourists from wandering too far. I could see the doubt in Zoe's eyes as she smirked, but she didn't back down. All right, she said, her tone teasing, let's test it. I'll say her name, nothing's going to happen. And then you'll all admit you were wrong. And that's when it happened. That's when she said it. The name that was never supposed to be spoken. The name that, according to the tales, carried a curse with it. The wind seemed to freeze as Zoe's voice rang out, clear and defiant, breaking the silence that had been slowly creeping around us. All right, here goes. Elara. There was an instant shift. The air felt heavier, almost oppressive. The flames in the campfire flickered, casting erratic shadows across the cabin and the dark woods beyond. Zoe let out a small laugh, clearly not impressed, but I noticed that none of us were quite as carefree anymore. At first, we didn't think much of it. Just a simple prank, right? But the crackling fire felt distant, the night felt colder, and the shadows seemed to stretch just a little too far. It was as though the woods had heard her, and something was beginning to answer back. But we were still too confident, still too sure of ourselves. Zoe's smirk never wavered, and that's what made the rest of us laugh it off. See, she said, motioning to the group. Told you, there's nothing to be afraid of. But I could feel it, that sinking feeling creeping up the back of my neck. The way the darkness outside seemed to press in just a little bit closer. What we didn't know then was that the name Zoe had spoken wasn't just a word, it was an invitation. And we had all just accepted it. It started subtly. At first, it was just a whisper in the distance. A sound so faint that we could have easily blamed it on the wind or the rustling of animals in the forest. But there was something wrong with it. It wasn't the usual creaking of tree branches swaying in the breeze or the rustle of leaves scattering across the ground. This was something different, something deliberate. The first noise came as a faint crunching sound, like footsteps on dry leaves. I glanced over at the others, but they hadn't seemed to notice. The fire crackled, sending sparks flying up into the air, and the warmth of the flames briefly pushed the chill from my bones. But then, there it was again. A series of footsteps, too close now, too loud, crunching along the forest floor, echoing unnervingly. I looked over to Jake and Adam, expecting them to hear it too, but they were too busy throwing logs onto the fire, oblivious to the growing tension. Zoe, though, had stopped laughing. She was staring into the darkness, her face pale under the flickering light. "Did you hear that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, my throat tight. "Yeah, it sounded like someone's walking around out there." But before we could even react, another sound emerged from the trees. This time it was softer. The wind, or at least we thought it was the wind, whispered through the branches. But it was more than just wind. It was as if the trees themselves were speaking, calling our names, one by one, in faint, unintelligible murmurs. It couldn't be the wind. I knew it couldn't. The air was dead still, too still. There wasn't a breeze to carry the voices, yet it felt as if they were right there, surrounding us. I glanced nervously around the circle, but Jake and Adam were still too busy arguing about whether to go for a midnight swim. Zoe's face twisted in confusion and a hint of unease. I swear I just heard someone say my name. Over there, by the trees. We all turned toward the forest, our eyes straining to see beyond the circle of light. The woods were dark, unnaturally dark, the shadows stretching far beyond the reach of the fire. And then, just like that, the wind stopped. Dead silence. No more whispers. No more footsteps. I swallowed hard, trying to shake the unease from my mind. It was probably nothing. But then, the creak of the cabin door broke the silence. It was subtle at first, just a small groan in the hinges, but it grew louder, like something was slowly pushing against it from the other side. I looked at Zoe, my heart racing. "Did you hear that?" I asked, voice trembling slightly. She nodded slowly, a flicker of fear crossing her face. The door groaned again, louder this time, followed by the faint sound of a window rattling in its frame. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, and instinctively, I moved closer to the fire. Jake and Adam were still dismissive. "It's just the wind, you guys. The cabin's old. It's probably just the weather." They weren't wrong. The cabin was old, worn down by years of neglect, but this didn't feel like a typical gust of wind rattling a window or an old door creaking in the night. This was deliberate. It was the sound of something moving or someone waiting. And then it happened again. This time, it was directly behind me. A sudden, sharp gust of cold air rushed past me, leaving a chill that seemed to bite into my very bones. I shuddered, glancing over my shoulder, but there was nothing there, nothing visible. Just the cold, the darkness, and the feeling of being watched. Did anyone feel that? I asked, my voice shaking now. Zoe's eyes widened. "Yeah, I felt it. It was right behind me." I turned to face her. She looked like she had seen a ghost, pale, her lips trembling. I could feel her anxiety in the air, and it was contagious. The doubt that had lingered in the back of my mind now had weight, a cold, suffocating weight. "We're just imagining things," Jake said, trying to keep the mood light. "You're all spooked. Let's just..." But his voice trailed off as another noise broke through the night, faint at first, then growing louder. A slow, dragging sound like something, or someone, was slowly moving toward us through the dark. My breath caught in my throat. I glanced around at the others, and I saw it in their eyes. Something had shifted. Zoe's confident demeanor was now replaced with palpable fear. She was no longer laughing, no longer dismissing the warnings. Her shoulders were tense, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "You hear that, right?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's getting closer." Adam and Jake looked at each other, then back to the forest, their expressions faltering for the first time since we'd arrived. Okay, Adam said, his voice tinged with uncertainty. "Maybe there's something out there, but it's probably just an animal." Before he could finish his sentence, the door creaked open again. Slowly, gradually, as though it was being pushed by an unseen hand. Everyone froze, and then a soft, unearthly whisper, like a breath on the back of our necks, filled the air. A name. Zoe. It was unmistakable. A voice that didn't belong to any of us. The campfire flickered violently, as if the wind was mocking us, and I swear I saw a shadow move just outside the circle of light. The fear was no longer something I could deny. I looked around at the group. Zoe was visibly shaking now. Jake and Adam, for all their bravado, couldn't hide the unease creeping into their expressions. We were no longer laughing, no longer dismissing the local legends as simple superstition. Something was happening, something we couldn't explain, and it was getting worse with each passing moment. I wanted to run, but the fear kept me rooted to the spot, the cold presence around us only growing stronger. Paranoia began to take root, and with it, the horrifying realization we were not alone. The atmosphere shifted, and in that moment, everything went still, eerily still. The sounds of the forest had faded completely, as if the very woods themselves were holding their breath. The flickering flames of the campfire cast uneasy shadows, but the light seemed to shrink from the encroaching darkness. The oppressive silence stretched, and the tension grew unbearable. Then it happened, the first real sign that we were not alone. A shadow appeared outside the cabin window. It was tall, far too tall to be any animal, far too tall to be one of us. At first, I thought it was just the angle of the shadows playing tricks on me. But the shape moved, and with it, the unmistakable presence of something, or someone very much alive. A whisper, faint but distinct, slipped through the silence, curling into our ears like a cold wind. Zoe. Her name. I could barely hear it, but it sent an icy chill down my spine, freezing the blood in my veins. I turned toward Zoe, but she was already staring at the window, her face drained of color. Her eyes were wide, locked on the shadow outside, as though she could see what I could not. "Did you hear that?" she whispered, her voice quivering. Before anyone could respond, the figure in the window moved. Slowly. Its presence loomed in the glass, a shadow that stretched and grew, as if it were pressing against the very fabric of the night. And then it was there, fully visible. A woman. She was draped in black, so dark that it seemed to consume the light around her. Her hair, long and unkempt, hung in strands that blended into the darkness, as though she were part of it. But it was her face, or the lack of one, that paralyzed us. Her features were obscured, lost in the shadow that swallowed her. Only her eyes, those eyes, pierced through the darkness. They glowed faintly, like two smoldering embers in the black night. Her gaze was cold, unnaturally still, fixed upon us with an intensity that made it impossible to look away. I could feel the weight of her presence pressing against me, making the air thick and suffocating. The moment we saw her, we knew. We had invoked her. We had mocked the warnings, laughed at the legends, and now we were paying the price. Maya, who had been the most dismissive of all, suddenly froze. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. Her face went pale, and she took a step back, eyes wide with terror. Her knees buckled, and she sank to the floor, too terrified to speak. The woman outside didn't move. She stood motionless at the window, her dark eyes locked on us, as if waiting for something, waiting for us to acknowledge her presence. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run, but my body wouldn't move. Fear had rooted me to the spot. The door creaked in the background, as if the house itself were coming alive, responding to her. And then she did something I will never forget. The figure, this thing, this spirit, turned and slowly, deliberately walked to the cabin door. The cold air followed her, seeping in through the gaps in the wooden frame, spreading a biting chill throughout the room. It wasn't just cold, it was unnatural, like the very temperature of the air had been altered by her presence. Without a sound, she raised one pale, outstretched hand, her fingers long and thin, pointing toward us. And then she beckoned, a single motion that seemed to stretch the very fabric of time itself. A command, an invitation. I felt it, deep within my chest. The call. It was undeniable. "Come out," the air seemed to say. "Come to me." We could no longer deny it. This was no longer a story, no longer a joke. We had called her into this world, and she had come. Panic erupted. "Get the door open. We have to get out," Jake shouted, his voice rising in panic. He ran toward the door, his hands fumbling at the handle. But it wouldn't budge. The door, once easy to open, refused to move. It was as if something was holding it shut, something stronger than the four of us combined. I joined him, slamming my shoulder against the wood, but it was useless. The door wouldn't move. The walls themselves seemed to press in around us, suffocating, closing in on every side. "Help! Come on!" Adam screamed, banging on the door. But his words only seemed to echo back at us in the vast, empty night. And there she was, still standing in the doorway, her hands slowly dropping. Her eyes never left us. She hadn't entered the cabin, but her presence filled every corner, every shadow. It was as if she was inside our very minds, inside our thoughts, her cold touch pressing on our souls. The desperation rose within me. The truth became clear. There was no escape. The door wouldn't open. The fire flickered, casting wild shadows across the room. But there was no warmth now, only an overwhelming sense of doom. Zoe, who had been the most confident moments ago, was now shaking uncontrollably. She's not going to let us leave," she whispered, her voice trembling. The cold wind picked up again, and I could feel it creeping through every crack in the cabin. We had no choice. We were trapped. The last thing I remember before everything went black was the sound of her whisper. It wasn't a voice anymore. It was the wind, the trees, the very forest itself speaking, calling us, telling us we had sealed our fate. And in the silence that followed, one thought echoed in my mind: we had asked for this. For a moment, everything stopped. The suffocating fear, the sense of inevitability, it all vanished in an instant. It felt like we were frozen in time, as though the world around us had paused, waiting for something, anything, to happen. Then, without warning, the door, the one that had been immovable just moments before, swung open. A gust of frigid air rushed through the cabin, carrying with it the smell of damp earth and something older, something decayed. We didn't even think. We didn't hesitate. In one frantic motion, the four of us scrambled toward the door, tumbling out into the dark woods. Our breath came in ragged gasps, hearts pounding in our chests like war drums. We ran without looking back, not caring which direction we were headed, as long as it took us farther from that cursed place. The trees loomed around us, their gnarled branches like skeletal fingers reaching out to grab us, but we didn't care. The only thing that mattered was escaping the thing that had followed us, her. We sprinted through the forest, adrenaline rushing through our veins, and for a brief moment, I allowed myself to believe we had outrun her, that she was left behind in that cabin, trapped within those walls where she belonged. But when we finally stopped, breathless and shaking, we turned to look back, and there she was. The figure stood motionless in the open doorway, her silhouette framed against the dim light from within the cabin. Her unkempt hair hung like a curtain around her face, and those glowing eyes, those cursed eyes, stared at us from the distance, never blinking, never moving. She was watching us, not just from afar, but still unmoving. She had not followed. Not yet. "She's still there," Zoe whispered, her voice hoarse, barely audible over the pounding of our hearts. We couldn't look away. It felt like something was pulling us back, urging us toward the porch where she stood, waiting, her presence too heavy to escape. The forest was silent again, too quiet. The air seemed to close in on us, stifling. And then it happened again. A whisper, soft and chilling, brushed against the back of my mind. It wasn't just a sound. It was like a feeling, a thought planted directly into my consciousness, like the words were being breathed into my very soul. "Zoe!" I spun around, but there was nothing there. No one. Just the dense trees surrounding us. The whisper came again. This time it was closer. "Maya." I froze. It wasn't just the name, it was the voice. The same voice we'd heard earlier, the one that had spoken her name, the one that had whispered across the air like an invitation. This time, it wasn't outside the cabin. It wasn't coming from the woods. It was inside our thoughts, creeping into our minds like a shadow that couldn't be outrun. I felt a cold hand on the back of my neck, and I whirled around, expecting to see her standing right behind me. But there was nothing there, just the dark emptiness of the woods, the quiet rustling of leaves. Still, the whispers continued, swirling around us, getting louder. It was as if the very air was alive with her voice. Every step, every breath, every movement felt tied to her. The fear that had gripped us earlier turned to sheer panic. We had escaped the cabin, but we hadn't escaped her. "She's in our heads," Zoe said, her voice cracking, her eyes wide with terror. "She's in our minds, following us. We can't get away." I turned to Adam and Jake, but neither of them could offer an explanation, their faces pale and drawn with fear. We didn't know what to do, didn't know how to stop this. There was no running, no escaping. Was she truly gone? I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to acknowledge that the horror we had encountered in that cabin might have followed us, might never leave us. But it was impossible to ignore the weight of it. The silence around us was unbearable. The only sound now was the rustling of leaves, the whispering wind that carried her name, our names, across the distance. We stumbled away, each of us lost in our own panic-stricken thoughts, unable to speak, unable to process what had just happened. But as we kept walking, the woods seemed to stretch endlessly in front of us. The darkness closed in on us, thick and suffocating. We reached a small clearing and stopped to catch our breath, the night around us eerily silent. I turned around, expecting to see the flickering light of the cabin far behind us. But there was nothing. The cabin was gone. The porch, the door, the figure gone. All that remained was the vast, unbroken wilderness, stretching as far as the eye could see. But something was wrong. The wind was still. And then I heard it, that unmistakable creak. The door, though we couldn't see it, was moving. Just slightly. I glanced at the others, my heart in my throat. My voice cracked as I spoke, barely a whisper. "She's waiting for us." A chill ran down my spine as the camera panned back to the cabin, a place we no longer had the courage to return to. The porch stood empty, but the door creaked again, slowly opening, as though it were expecting us to come back. We had escaped, but somehow, I knew that the real nightmare was only just beginning. The questions swirled in my mind, unanswered. Had we really escaped? Was she still out there, in the woods, in our minds? Or had we never really left at all? As the door creaked in the distance and the shadows continued to stretch across the woods, one question remained. Did we truly escape? Or was she still out there, waiting for the next foolish souls to invoke her name? Do you believe in what they told us to never speak of? Do you think we really outran the curse, or is the shadow still following us? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more true horror stories around the campfire. Because who knows, the next story might just be about you.